So guys, good afternoon, and thank you for being here today. This is going to be a 30-minute webinar, and we're just going to discuss the basic of drawing trend lines. So the webinar today is about trend lines 101. We are going to discuss what are trend lines, how you could use it, and how to draw it, and more importantly, how you could actually use it as a solo strategy, as exclusive strategy without using other indicators or other strategies. So before anything else, before we continue, kindly check your audio and video and check if everything is okay on your end. And let me know in the chat box if you're having some issues. Kapag nagkakaproblema kayo, let me know. And we actually have some account managers in attendance as well to help you out. Okay? All right, so let's continue. So what are trend lines? Trend lines determines if the market is uptrending or downtrending. Basically, if the market's price is increasing or decreasing, it helps professional traders select potential buy or sell levels. Meaning, yung trend line, so very basic lang naman siya, pero it's actually very powerful. It could actually help someone to identify areas where they could put a buy or sell, no? And it can be used exclusively for technical analysis. So how to draw the trend line? So to draw your trend line, we have to look at, if this is an uptrend, we have to look at the pivots. So pivots are basically logical areas in the chart where we believe that the price actually pivoted or reversed, either either the entire thing has actually moved to a different direction or it's just a retracement. Okay, so if it is going up, we look at connecting the lows. Okay, and if it's going down, we are going to connect the highs. But there is one rule to this. Okay, to do this, you have to make sure that you have the three test rule. Okay, to make sure that your trend line is valid, you need to have a three test rule. And what is a three test rule? No, in order for a trend line to be considered valid, we need the candlestick or the bar to touch or test the trend line at least 3 times to make sure it's valid. Okay, so what does that mean? Now let me go to our chart. So I already prepared a chart here. Let me know if you could see my screen. Okay, so how do you draw a trend line? So here we have an uptrend. Obviously, this is an uptrend. We are in the Euro USD 1 hour chart. Okay. All right. So to draw a trend line, you have to look for a tool. This is the trend line tool. You have the same thing in MT4 and MT5. And to draw this, you have to look at the pivot. Okay. So here we have at the very end of this trend. So we have this downtrend here, and obviously this area rejected it, and the price not only retraced but actually moved to a different direction. So here what we could do is we could create a line to connect those pivot points. So since this is an uptrend, we are going to connect the lows here. Okay, and we could do exactly the same thing to a downtrend, but for the downtrend we look at the highs, something like that. All right, so those are considered trend lines, but we have this concept of a valid trend line. So what is a valid trend line? A valid trend line is basically where we are 90% sure that the trend line is representational of the direction of the market. Yun talaga papunta yung market. So here's an example. So let's delete this. Okay, and see, here we have a consolidation here. So we are going to use that consolidation as a start of a trend line, as a start of a new direction. So we could put a trend line from here to the next low here. Okay, this is the low. and the next low is here. You just have to connect that, and there you have it. So you could say that this trend line is valid because as you draw the trend line, the the price actually followed the trend line or respected the trend line 3 times. All right, that is what you would consider a valid trend line. Now let's look for a downtrend. Let's try this one. All right. Okay, so I would say this is also a valid trend line because you have one, you have two, and you have three touches. Now, the price doesn't need to really touch the trend line. If it can come close enough, like 1 pip or 2 pips with the trend line, you can consider it as a touch to the trend line. All right. We will tell you later why you need to make sure that you are working with a valid trend line. All right. Let's go back to the presentation. All right. So here's another example. So this is the Euro Kiwi, Euro NZD. Okay, so this is in an uptrend. So the Forex chart reveals that this is an uptrend, and you have a trend line that you could draw a trend line touching 5 points. All right, 5 points. So it's obviously a valid trend line. All right, the trend line has been drawn to connect the swing lows on multiple occasions and therefore can be referred to be a trend line support. As price action has tested this trend line 5 times, it will be presumed by the Forex trader that it is likely that the price is likely to test it again at some point in time. Now, it mentioned trend line support. So every time you draw a trend line at the bottom or you are connecting lows, so meaning it's an uptrend, you would consider that as a support. Meaning when the price tries to hit it again, we could assume that that level will be supported and the price will reject it. It will try to go up again. Okay, so that's basically a support. Basically, the trend line is supporting the price. All right, makes sense? Here's another example. This is a downtrend, and this chart is the Euro Yen. All right, same thing in here. Okay, this is a downtrend, and there is one, two, three, four, five, six times that the trend line supported the price, or yeah, supported the price, and you would consider this as a trend line resistance. All right, so a downtrend on a downtrend, when the price is trying to go higher and the trend line rejected it, you know, that is considered a resistance. So exactly the same thing. It's just so happened that on an uptrend you are connecting the lows, and on a downtrend you are connecting the highs. Here's a good example of validating a trend line. Okay, so validating a trend line means you need to have three instances of a touch on a trend line to consider it valid. Now this is very important because we will be using trend line as a way to actually enter a trade, and you have to make sure that you are using a valid trend line, meaning there is a big chance that the next touch will do the exactly same thing, which is going to reject the price. So if there's only 2 touches, you are not, this is still a trend line, but it's not a validated trend line. You need to have 3 touches to consider it as a valid trend line. All right, let's have a quiz in here, a little quiz. We have 3 lines, we have 3 trend lines in here. Okay, so which trend line do you think or do you suppose is correct? Is it the yellow one, the green one, or the black one? I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds to think about it, and if you could kindly put your answer on the chat box. Is it the yellow, green, or the black one? Which do you think is correctly drawn? Anyone? All right. Okay. So the answer is all three are actually correctly drawn. Now let's look at the yellow one. The yellow one actually tries to put the trend line from the close of the pivot instead of the wick or the shadow. And, and you can see this is a valid trend line as this trend line was respected several times. Even though there is a downshoot or what we call a fake breakout. Now, a fake breakout doesn't mean that the trend line is invalid. All right, it simply means that there is a momentum in the market, and therefore sometimes you would see wicks going out of the trend line, but the bar is still close within or above the trend line. All right, so you could still consider this yellow line a valid trend line with a fake breakout. All right, and so one, two, three, four, five, six times that the trend line was respected. The green one was doing exactly the same thing as the yellow one, same trend as the yellow one, but instead of the close, it tries to put in the wick or the shadow. So that's one, two, and then three. So this is still a valid trend line. All right, it touched it, moved a little bit before it actually invalidated it. Now the black one is instead of this trend here, instead of this trend here, right? It's trying to capture the bigger trend, okay? And the bigger trend would be one, two, and then three. Now the black one is we could consider not yet validated because we could assume that the last bar is not yet done. It hasn't closed yet. But if it does and moved upward, right, then we could say it is a valid trend line. Okay? All right. So how do we use trend line? How do we use trend line in our trade? Now, it's very important that we are only going to use a validated trend line whenever we trade. A three-touch trend line or a trend line that has been respected three times, we could assume that the fourth one will do exactly the same thing. Not always though, but it is an assumption. Since there are three times in history that it respected the trend line, we are going to assume that the fourth one will do exactly the same thing. But again, it is not 100% sure. Okay? But we need to have that kind of assumption to actually trade anything basically. All right, so here we have a bull market or an uptrend, and you could see that this trend line was tested three times, one, two, three. We could assume that the fourth touch will do exactly the same thing. So what we are going to do is we're going to put a buy order within that area, within this area, okay? And the assumption is that it's going to go higher. And if you are going to put another trend line in here to see the range, you could put your take profit near it. All right. Okay. Same thing for a downtrend here. All right. Since it has been respected three times, no? We could expect na ito ibababa ulit. And we could put a trend line and put our TP there. All right. Any questions about it? Any questions? Okay. Now, this is very important. When you are doing trend line as your exit or as your entry point, it is a good idea to add additional confirmation, like a bullish or bearish pin bar. Okay. So let's go back a little bit here. So here we do have a trend line, right? And it says that you could use the trend line as an entry strategy. But a good confirmation is that you are going to see a some sort of a pin bar in here, where you can see that the price created a bar with a long tail. All right, that's actually an indicator of a rejection. Same thing on the downtrend, where you have a falling star, where you have a long wick at the upper part of the of the candlestick. And so if you have that kind of confirmation, you could say that you have a better chance of winning the trade, because not only that the price is touching a possible turning point, but it is also creating price chart patterns that corresponds to a rejection. Okay. All right. So earlier we said that a trend line normally gives you a visual representation of a trend. However, that direction or that trend has to end after some times, right? It does have to end. It is going to change direction eventually. So how do we know that the trend is ending? All right. It is very important that we not only we know that the direction is going to continue, but we are also aware when that direction or that trend is about to end. So here we have an uptrend, right? One, two, three, and here instead of the price, let me just clear the drawing earlier. Instead of the price respecting it, what it did is it actually punctured. It punctured the trend line, okay, and went back. And instead of using it as a support, these pivots are using it as a support. Now it looks like that the price is using it as a resistance, right? It punctured it, went back a little bit, but now it is creating a down bar or a bear bar in here, and it looks like it's going to go down. Now that is very normal, by the way, for the price to actually invalidate the trend line, go up, touch it again, but instead of using it as a support, it's using it as a resistance. All right, and vice versa for a downtrend. Here we have a downtrend, the price is using it as a resistance. On the fourth one, instead of creating a pin bar, it actually punctured it, went back a little in here, and use it as support to go higher. All right, if you see those kind of things, that means that there is a change on the direction of the price. Or if not the entire direction, it means that it's no longer respecting the trend that you have right now. All right, does that make sense? Now earlier I mentioned about fake breakouts. Here we have a couple of fake breakouts. So false breakouts or fake breakouts are frequent and not to be confused with trendline break. In a downtrend, these occur when price temporarily moves above the trend line but closes below it. And in an uptrend, a false breakout would manifest itself with price moving below the trend line temporarily but will close above it. So what does that mean? So here let's say we have a trend line going down, for example, all right, because this is not technically a downtrend, but this is more of a triangle. But it gives us a good example of a fake breakout in here. So let's say this is a downtrend and you find that there is a breakout, right? However, the price moved up supposedly to break the trend line, but instead of closing at the upper side, it went back to the range and closed below it. So that would be considered a false breakout. It never really breaks out of the trend line. Basically it's a test. All right, it's a test of the trend line, and we are not going to consider that as a break. So it's a false breakout. Same thing for a downtrend, for example, wherein the price actually moved below the trend line but closed higher, right? Then we are not going to consider that as a breakout or true breakout, but it's still a false breakout. You would also see example like this, where the price is like cruising along the trend line. There's a lot of example of this. All right. So even if there is the small breaks like this, you would see that the close is still above the trend line. So we are not also going to consider that as a false breakout. All right. So guys, all of these examples that we have, you could actually do exactly the same kind of drawings using MetaTrader 4 or MetaTrader 5. I'm simply using a different platform for the ease of teaching, no? But you could use exactly the same thing in MetaTrader 4 and MetaTrader 5. There is a drawing tool there that for Trendline and for race as well. So it's actually easier with MetaTrader 5 and MetaTrader 4. So again, guys, thank you so much for attending, and hopefully to see you on our next webinar. Thank you so much for today, and have a great afternoon. Bye bye.